Hello, Americans, patriots. Thank you for joining me. I am James Detroit, and I told you as a follow-up to the last video, I wanted to do a series of things. I have some information in front of me. I'll be sharing with some of it with you today. And thank you. Thank you for spending your time with me. I hope you do find a value. I hope you share it with others. We have 55 subscribers that I can see, but as my suspicions, I think we have more views, maybe less. I don't know for sure, because I don't think the information is being exchanged accurately, accounted for. Let's put it that way. So 17 ways to minimize exposure to dirty electricity and EMFs. That is an article that I would refer to in the, and I believe it was, and let me just try to make sure. I think this is the Truth About Cancer site. I appreciate them. They put out a lot of great information. So there is two other articles from Whiskey and Gunpowder. I'm only going to share one with you today. I hope to get back to you and share another one. But the Great Reset arrives, the dollar derailment of 2021. This is, folks, I said it earlier, when the money goes, everything goes. It's not being political. It's an attempt to seek the truth. That's what we're doing here, consistently trying to seek the truth. So, Byron King, managing editor of Whiskey and Gunpowder. I'm going to read the article to you right now and have some commentary. I'm on the road this week looking at mining plays, but I'm also following the news of the new COVID vaccines. The article is entitled, "The Most Effective Bioweapon of World War II." We're looking at new biotechnology developed at warp speed per the label President Trump used. Much of this is new tech developed rapidly by U.S. firms, no less under wartime pressure to deliver results. It's a hopeful harbinger, but for better things to come, but at the same time, and outside these showcase vaccine prototypes, what we see of U.S. Big Pharma is but a shadow of its former glory. I discussed all of this last year here at the Whiskey Bar, and today I want to rerun the article that just to remind us of how much industry America has lost to globalization. So here's the rerun of the article. Her name was Ann Miller. She was from Connecticut, age 33, very sick and likely to die. Ann had streptococcal infection. Her body temperature spiked at times to 107. That alone should have killed her. Meanwhile, Ann's blood was filled with microbial poison. Transfusions and sulfa drugs were ineffective. Per medical protocols, doctors at Yale New Haven Medical Center notified her family and called for a pastor. Still, one doctor had heard of an experimental drug. It was a military development subject to strict secrecy. He only knew about it because he had a friend who had a friend. I got a guy. You know what I'm saying. Ann's doctor called Merck Pharmaceuticals in New Jersey. Eventually, he found someone who would make a life and death decision. The next day, a special package arrived at the hospital. On Thursday, March 12th, doctors at Yale administered the first dose of Merck's medicine to Ann. The next day, Friday the 13th, Ann's fever began to abate. She received additional doses of the drug over the weekend, and on Monday morning, March 16th, Ann called for a nurse. She wanted breakfast. Ann recovered and went on to live another 57 years. She died in 1999 at age 90. The New York Times published her obituary. Ann Miller was the first patient ever saved by penicillin. Indeed, Ann was the first successful test patient, patient zero, one might say, for one of the most powerful bioweapons of the World War II. Ann Miller received those precious doses of penicillin in March 1942. By then, the U.S. was 3 months into the war, but it had been raging in Europe since 1939. Germany had conquered Western Europe, bombed Britain, and invaded the Soviet Union. In Asia, Japan had invaded China in the mid-1930s. By March 1942, Japan was rolling across Southeast Asia and through the Pacific Theater. Soldiers across the world were dying of infections. Military doctors begged for some way to save them. So nations went to work, starting their search for any promising ideas that had been shelved for one reason or another. War shines a light on undeveloped ideas, after all. It spurs funding. Allocation of resources, functional development, and implementation. That was the case with penicillin. While it was first used to cure a patient in 1942, the idea originated in 1928 when a British scientist named Alexander Fleming identified the basic penicillin compound. Then in the 1930s, other scientists at Oxford University further pursued the concept. In 1940, with war raging in Europe and the threat of bombs dropping on their labs, the Oxford scientists left Britain and came to the U.S. to continue their medical research. The Brits persuaded several U.S. pharmaceutical companies to participate in antibiotic efforts, including Merck, Squibb & Sons, Eli Lilly, Pfizer, Lederle Labs, and others. By 1942, each company had teams working on penicillin, but the drug was not in production. Indeed, the few doses administered by the Yale doctors to Ann Miller over 1 week in March were experimental. They constituted half of all the penicillin in the world at the time. But after success of the Merck product and news of Miller's full recovery, seemingly miraculous recovery, the American pharmaceutical industry went into production. Even then, it wasn't easy. The U.S. economy in World War II was quite different from what we see today. In many respects, the U.S. government controlled the economy. Nothing big or industrial happened without fitting into a government plan. The U.S. government controlled everything from steel output to railway transport, not to mention concrete, labor, lumber, or anything else you needed to build a factory. And when it came to manufacturing medicines, penicillin in particular, Uncle Sam controlled the scale up too. For the U.S. government's War Production Board, companies including Merck, Pfizer, Eli Lilly received allocations to build penicillin plants, and the result was spectacular. In mid-1942, a few months post Ann Miller, the U.S. had sufficient penicillin to treat just 10 patients. But 2 years later, by June 1944, in the D-Day invasion of Normandy, U.S. penicillin stocks numbered over 2.3 million doses. By the fall of 1945, as the war ended, U.S. penicillin stockpiles were up to the billions. No typo, billions. As a result of penicillin, by the end of World War II, hundreds of thousands of U.S. and Allied soldiers survived battlefield wounds that would otherwise have been fatal, or at least led to amputations. Indeed, penicillin can be considered a bioweapon in the same sense that the U.S. had it and Germany and Japan did not. Penicillin conferred a battlefield advantage. The U.S. Army estimates that absent penicillin, U.S. combat deaths in the war would have been at least 15% higher. In 1945, the Nobel Prize for Medicine was awarded jointly to Sir Alexander Fleming, Ernest Boris Chain, and Sir Howard Walter Florey for, quote, the discovery of penicillin and its curative effect in its various infectious diseases, end quote. They just got the ball rolling, though. The effort to industrialize penicillin required tens of thousands of trained chemists, engineers, and technicians. They came from the industrial heart of America, and they came with mass manufacturing processes to meet a medical level and pharmaceutical quality while running plants at wartime levels of output. Novel innovations from these chemists and engineers included seemingly odd things. For example, the original method to cultivate penicillin involved using cantaloupe mold and mushroom spawn to enrich corn steep liquor. This plus deep tank fermentation to permit mass production at pharmaceutical levels of quality. Penicillin is truly a World War II success story for America. At the end of the day, the factories were there, the people were there, the science and the engineering worked, and penicillin came out in quantity sufficient to alter the timing and course of war. Meanwhile, it was an added benefit that penicillin cured an array of sexually transmitted diseases. And it shows a waste can in city, and it says, buy bonds, trash the Axis. And then also it says penicillin cures gonorrhea in 4 doses. See your local doctor. Post-war penicillin became a so-called miracle drug that propelled many U.S. pharmaceutical companies to world scale and into the industrial investment limelight. Well into the 1990s, U.S. industry produced pretty much all the antibiotics used in the U.S. I'm going to say that one more time. Well into the 1990s, U.S. industry produced pretty much all the antibiotics used in the U.S. There was the Pfizer plant in Groton, Connecticut, the Eli Lilly plant near Indianapolis, the Upjohn in Michigan. Then came China. And in the 1990s, Chinese corporations built new factories on a scale that dwarfed older companies in the U.S., as well as in Europe. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Chinese drug companies were dumping vast amounts of pharmaceutical products, virtually none of it inspected to U.S. quality standards, into the U.S. markets at below cost levels. After China entered the World Trade Organization, and if you don't know who is primarily responsible for signing off on that, you need to look that up. After China entered the World Trade Organization, Chinese products flowed in an industrial landslide, a marketing wipeout that overwhelmed domestic competition. American business culture has long emphasized low prices, and the free trade crowd are happy to see imported goods land on U.S. piers and sell for less than the local competition. Everyone loves a bargain, right? Of course, U.S. pharmaceutical buyers and insurance companies that pay for drugs wanted low costs. Chinese products was there, hovering at unprecedented low price points. Some bargain, though. China dumped uninspected product from obscure origins, and the U.S. government and other influential players looked the other way. Domestic drug manufacturing plants simply could not compete. And by the mid-2000s, U.S. pharmaceutical companies shuttered all domestic antibiotic plants. The last U.S. location was closed by Pfizer in 2004. It's not just a little bit of a cutback in the U.S. output. Essentially, all antibiotic production in the U.S. is gone, out of business. Employees laid off, sold their houses, moved away, not there anymore. When you go to the pharmacy to fill a prescription today, there's over 90% probability that Chinese compounds and components go into your mouth. If you go to a clinic or a hospital and receive intravenous antibiotics, that's Chinese product entering your veins. On a good day, the pills might have been pressed in a U.S. or European plant, but still from Chinese ingredients at uninspected Chinese plants. The next time you have a prescription, ask the pharmacist or doctor where the drugs originated. Go ahead. More than likely, those pills you take home from the pharmacy were pressed and packaged in China, made from Chinese ingredients. The days of American drugs for Americans are long gone. This goes for the U.S. military, too. The days of American penicillin for American soldiers are history, even allowing for advances in antibiotics beyond penicillin. It's nearly all Chinese now. 30 years of globalization have killed off the heart and soul, essentially all of the basic U.S. drug-making capability. Instead, China now controls the supply chain for most medications, from pills in the blister packs down to the fundamental compounds that go into fermentation vessels. The ingredients are a product of China, Inc. And any more of the human skills and knowledge set aside are inside Chinese brains. Keep in mind, these Chinese pharmaceutical plants and processes are not subject to any routine U.S. inspections. Just take your chances. The U.S. government has been a poor steward of the American economy. I'm going to read that one more time. The U.S. government has been a poor steward of the American economy. Certainly, as regards to the former jewel of the nation's pharmaceutical industry, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has watched this whole mess unfold with little outcry and few inspections of Chinese production. Big Pharma, the well-capitalized drug companies, are part of the fraud too, by hiding facts and misrepresenting the source of most drugs that they will sell. Is there a silver lining to this dark cloud? Nope. Sorry, I can't come up with anything to make you feel better. Although in a future article, I'll offer ideas on how the U.S. might work to change this adverse situation. It'll be a long slog back up that hill, though. The history of the U.S. pharmaceutical business certainly holds moments of brilliance, such as with penicillin in World War II. And there's plenty of U.S. research ongoing, such as it's not being stolen, hijacked, or just given away to foreign competitors in the name of openness and scientific freedom. But when it comes to the pills you pop into your mouth, it's been a Chinese takeover. Blame the globalists who allowed China to kick in the door. On that note, I rest my case. That's all for now. Thank you for subscribing and reading. Best wishes, Byron King. Wow, can you say buzzkill? Absolutely. But today is still a great day, because for those of us who have a faith in our Creator that breathed life into human existence, everything is His will. You might not be able to see Him. It might be invisible, but undefeated. And it is always in control. The will of our Father in heaven. Man, I read stuff like that and I think, what's happening? My celebration is because our Bible has never been proven incorrect. Small enough, according to Augustine, small enough for a lamb to wade in it, and deep enough for an elephant to drown is our scripture. The end times are near. It's going to be okay. We know who wins with all the evil, with all of somebody else's nefarious plans and narratives that are trying to make somebody else wealthy. Those of us who know that we know that we know that we know that our fingernails, every essence of our existence, every cell in our body knows that our breath breathed into us in existence in Genesis is the same breath that I'm breathing right now. That is something you need to concentrate on, and so do I. Thank you for sharing this time with me. I am James Detroit, and for now, I'm out.